Hi, I'm Melissa Cobb. Come fly with AOPA. This week, the latest on AOP's efforts to get Amnesty for veterans, an exclusive look at the Howard 500, and aviation guru Andrew King. Well, only 17 Howard 500s were ever built, and we take you behind the scenes of what it takes to get one of these flying. It's one of the last two remaining Howards that are flying.
We're on a Howard 500, serial number 105, which I believe is the fifth one to be done. They made 17 of these airplanes. It started out in life as a fighter bomber bought by the British and went to the South African Air Force until they finished with it in the late 50s, and then D. Howard bought all those airplanes with the intent of making it into an executive airplane, which he had been doing for years, converting other models of Lockheed bombers into executive airplanes. This one different because it was intended to be converted in such a way that it could be pressurized. They changed the outer wing panels to a supercritical wing panel. Instead of the 1820 engines on it, they put R2800 twin row engines on it, which are Douglas DC-6 engines. Unfortunately for the airplane, at the same time Grumman was coming out with their first turboprop business airplane, the Grumman G1, which most of the bigger corporations went into that. It's sort of the end of the era for these big piston airplanes. All flaps, cooler doors.
Okay, I'm open from the left side.
Open. Emergency gear bypass.
Okay, that's your star valve down there.
Let's check that for closed. It's a little different starting one of these. You're starting it with a mixture at cutoff, and you're actually starting it using the priming system, which unlike most engines, it doesn't prime in the cylinders. The carburetor on this is a big 4-barrel Holly that's sitting on top of it, and you're actually priming, squirting gas in the carburetor inlet. It's a pressure carburetor. That goes right out of that into the inlet of the supercharger and then on to all cylinders, so that when you are priming it, you're priming all cylinders. And then when it's happy, you're holding the prime on and squirting that gas in there, and then you bring the mixture up to a rich position, and it'll start gagging because it's got prime and the carburetor feeding it now, and then you let up on the prime and it catches on the carburetor. That's the way you start it. Two-pilot airplane. It's busy. It's a very complicated airplane system-wise. So the co-pilot is half flight engineer or more than half flight engineer and half co-pilot. If he or she is doing the job right, servicing the captain and taking care of all the systems and air conditioning and fuel and watching the engines and making sure that everything is as it should be, he or she is pretty busy. You just can't push throttles all the way to the stop on these big supercharged radials. You have limitations. You have to know all of that stuff. You can't just drop somebody in the seat and say, let's go.
Okay, engine run up. Checklist is completed now before takeoff.
Before takeoff, please.
Flight controls.
The elevators, rudders, ailerons, checked. There's two of them left flying, this one and Tony's other one. That's it. That's all that are left out of all those airplanes. So it's a pretty big privilege to be able to just cruise around in it. It's a tremendous airplane. Someday it'll be over, and you'll have some really tremendous memories to look back on.
Three really important updates for you this week on AOPA's advocacy front. Number one, AOPA is advocating for veterans. There are veterans who have been caught up in an FAA investigation as to whether or not they reported receiving disability benefits through the VA, and some are actually facing enforcement action. So AOPA has reached out to the FAA. We've requested amnesty for these veterans. We want the veterans to have a chance to go back and correct their medical certificate application.
They're veterans who have served our nation and protected our freedom and our freedom to fly, if you will. And so they deserve everything that they can get to ensure that their issues are addressed with respect to these medical forms, and they deserve this. Is why we're involved in it.
AOPA also noted that the medical certificate application just needs to be updated, period, to improve clarity. Now, another win, this is on the basic med front. So basic med is the medical alternative that AOPA championed for pilots, and that went into effect back in May 2017. So the FAA recently released a report that looks back at the last 3 years of general aviation data, and what that report found when comparing private pilots flying under basic med to private pilots flying with a third-class medical certificate is that there's really no safety difference.
It's a resounding win. It's something that we've known for several years now, since the program was first put into place in 2017. And since that time, we've had nearly 80,000 pilots fly under the privileges of a basic med certificate. So it's very, very encouraging. I think we'll just continue to see this program grow and grow, and pilots are enjoying it very much.
If you're planning to fly along the Chicago lakefront on your way to EAA AirVenture in Oshkosh, Wisconsin this summer, be aware Chicago Midway's Class C airspace is going to be changing in June. You're going to want to familiarize yourself with the airspace before you fly through there. AOPA has worked with the FAA on the airspace changes to Chicago Midway since 2020, and we negotiated several changes to minimize the impact on general aviation pilots. We'll drop a link to this story and the other advocacy wins that we mentioned down in the description below. That way you can go and get all the details on each effort. Now, to quickly catch you up on the news of this week, the NTSB has released the probable cause of the 2021 midair collision between a Cirrus SR-22 and a Fairchild Swearingen Metroliner at Centennial Airport in Denver. Now, thankfully, nobody was seriously injured or killed in that accident. The NTSB said the probable cause was the Cirrus pilot's failure to maintain the final approach course for the assigned runway, and that resulted in the collision with the Metroliner that was on final to the parallel runway. Now, it listed contributing factors as well. One was the controller failed to issue a traffic advisory to the Metroliner pilot about the location of the Cirrus, and then also the Cirrus pilot's approach speed was 50 knots faster than the maximum recommended approach speed for that aircraft. The AOPA Air Safety Institute has released a Seaplane accident analysis report, and that report takes a look at accident data from 2008 to 2022. The report analyzes seaplane accidents, their causes, and safety recommendation. Special thanks to the Hall Halliburton Foundation and the Seaplane Pilots Association for helping make this report possible, and we have a link to the report in the description below. Well, it's time for the FAA's annual General Aviation and Part 135 activity survey. So if you get a postcard in the mail or if you get an email, be sure to take the survey, because the data that's collected from that, and this is for 2022, the data that's collected from that, it helps factor the accident rate, see how safety initiatives that have been implemented are working, figure out GA's impact on the economy, and also help determine infrastructure funding. So it really is important to have an accurate picture of how often we're out there flying. So please do be sure to fill that out. All right, now let's take a look at the go-to guy for the vintage aviation community, Andrew King.
I want people to think I'm the biggest liar in the nursing home. I want, oh, Mr. King's talking about flying Fokker triplanes again and working on the Wright brothers airplanes and stuff, and I've done it, you know, and so that's kind of my goal, is to be thought of as the biggest liar in the nursing home. My uncle found out about Rhinebeck and got involved right in the early days, in the early 60s, or middle 60s, I guess. And then my dad moved to Nyack, New York, and my uncle naturally introduced him to Cole Palin and Rhinebeck and the aerodrome and things. The old Rhinebeck Aerodrome was founded by Cole Palin in the late 50s, 59 is the official date. It's a living museum. They have airplanes from the pioneer era, 1908, 1909, all the way up through World War II, training biplanes and stuff, so into the 40s. And they do air shows on weekends during the summertime. And it's one of the few places in the world where you can go and see 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 antique airplanes fly on one day in one air show. So they started getting involved in flying the airplanes and working on airplanes and building airplanes. And I was a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old kid there. And then my dad bought a Piper Cub. He learned to fly in a Piper Cub. I think I was 5 years old when my dad sold it. I started flying the Piper Cub as soon as I could see over the windowsill. As soon as I was tall enough to see over the windowsill, I would do the stick, and I couldn't reach the rudder. He would do the rudders and stuff. So I sold it in a Piper Cub, did my cross-country work in an Aranca Champ. My dad had a Cessna 140 that I did my radio work and that kind of stuff in to get my license. I went to Parks College in St. Louis, part of St. Louis University, and got my A&P right out of high school. Got my commercial rating when I was out there, and then started doing air shows as soon as I came back. So I think I flew my first air show at Rhinebeck when I was 20 years old, I believe. I always tell people pre-1950 is kind of my cutoff. There's a lot of late 40s airplanes that are pretty cool airplanes. But the reason that I'm more interested in that stuff, I think, is because I like the history behind it. I wanted to know what it was like to fly an airmail airplane, you know, or fly a Fokker triplane and be in combat. And I've flown 156 different types. People always ask me what was the worst one, and I always tell them before I answer the question, I want you to know I loved every minute of it. But, you know, there was the 1911 Curtiss Pusher was probably the worst flying airplane that I ever flew. It just, I mean, it was 1911 and they didn't know what they were doing, and it was just a terrible, terrible airplane. You know, it's a great big box kite and you sit out in the middle of it. And the Bucher Youngman is my favorite. It's just a very pleasant flying airplane. It was designed in 1934-35 in Germany. It can do pretty much all the loops and rolls that I want to do, and it's just a very pleasant flying airplane. The controls are very well harmonized. It lands pretty easy. The reason really that I like the 1920s and 1930s airplanes is the idea of living history, of, you know, experiencing. I've been in an open cockpit biplane when it was 25 degrees out over the mountains of Pennsylvania, stomping my feet to try to keep warm. You read in the books, they say, I stomp my feet, it doesn't work, you know? So when I read a book now, I have more of an appreciation of when those original pilots, what they were doing and what they were feeling. I know how cold it can be in an airplane, flying over snow in a biplane and stuff. And so that's a lot of the draw for me, is kind of experiencing the history. Now, you know, we're a lot safer. I can land and get on my cell phone and, you know, call an Uber and go to the hotel. But still, I do understand history more from having kind of been able to live it. I have flown pre-1950 airplanes in all 50 United States and most of the provinces of Canada with a chart and a compass. I tell people that if I'm going over 100 miles an hour, I'll use a GPS, but very few of the things I fly go over 100 miles an hour. The point being that one of the appeals of that era is people had to rely on themselves. There was no magenta line. You know, if you got somewhere, it was because you had the skill to navigate to that spot. You know, there was more self-reliance, I think, maybe more diversity of skills or something. It took something to accomplish something then. Not to say that everything is easy nowadays and there are different challenges nowadays, but basic raw stuff like taking an airplane with no electrical system and no radio and anything and flying it from here to California, you know, very few people do that anymore. And I like knowing the name of every town that goes by and the rivers and the, you know, lakes and stuff. And I just, the process of flying cross country appeals to me. I have about 4,400 hours, and probably 2,500 of them are cross country. In a biplane, there's just a visceral thrill, I think, from just being at 1,000 feet and watching the earth go by and having the wind in your face, and the history almost doesn't matter at that point. It's just something fun about being in a biplane.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Fly with AOPA. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all AOPA's latest videos. And this week we leave you with flying footage from Bob Solimasi and his wife Diane, and it's their trip from Manassas, Virginia out west. Be sure to send in your favorite flying videos at the link in the description. You just might see them in an upcoming show. And as always, if you're not already an AOPA pilot, we'd love for you to join us. Just click the link at the end of the video to learn more. We'll see you next week.